Your stories don't define you. How you tell them will. Hi, I'm Sarah Elkins, your host and chief story maker of Elkins Consulting. If relationships are the key to happiness, communication is the doorway, and communication is most engaging when we use stories as our foundation. We share stories for a lot of reasons, to persuade, to entertain, to connect, but what we sometimes forget is the impact of the stories we tell ourselves. Whether you're sharing personal stories or business stories, how you share them makes a difference in how you remember them and in how you're perceived by the people you're interacting with. During this podcast, I'm asking you to listen, to consider your related stories, to listen and consider which stories in your life might have impacted you in a similar way. For today's podcast, I'm speaking with my friend Derek Hoffman, CEO of At Hand Spray Systems, and a business consultant that's brought in to help solve problems in unique ways. When I think about Derek Hoffman, I think that he's not just thinking outside of the box. He doesn't know there was a box in the first place. Right. So Derek, welcome to the show. Thanks so much for sitting with me and chatting with me about your stories.
Thanks for having me.
My first question is usually tell me something that other people don't know. But in this case, I'm going to ask you something a little different. Tell me something that's kind of a unique thing about you, kind of something that other people might know about you, but that is really kind of a unique thing.
So, although people who know me know this, not everybody has seen it, and not everybody believes it even when they do see it, but I am an accomplished balloon artist.
A balloon artist. Okay, so you go to fairs and you pump out one of those big long balloons and twist it into something interesting?
Basically, at this point, if I'm making balloons, it's either for my own personal entertainment or, as a volunteer for a charitable cause. But I have in the past done all sorts of professional events where I was paid to pump out a long balloon and twist it into animals and other sculptures.
So tell me what got you into this. I mean, what happened that you said, I think I want to be a balloon artist?
So, and this will tie in with your intro. I saw somebody doing it. I was in my early 20s. I was working in a restaurant as a waiter, and I was somewhere else, and I saw somebody making balloons, and I asked him how much money he made, and I did the math and compared what he was doing in a restaurant, going table to table, compared to what I was doing. And I said, I could do that. And then my friends were all there like, yeah, sure, you can do that. And as with everything, I trial and error my way until I figure out how to do something. Taught myself balloons, got the restaurant I was working in to pay me to do them and let me work shifts there. And I went from there. I mean, unfortunately, balloons are the product, but for me, it was just another opportunity for business, for my first opportunity to be in business. It didn't matter what the product was.
So how old were you?
I was 22, so 21 years of making balloon animals.
That's pretty impressive.
I feel like I should have a silver anniversary party coming up.
I just want to ask you one question. What is the most unusual thing that you learned how to make with balloons?
So it's not about learn how to make. At this point, it's if somebody asks for something, I will figure out a way to make it. The things people ask for are Eiffel Tower. Everybody quotes Wedding Crashers and asks for a bicycle, you quoting the movie. And I generally try to fill their request because they think they're challenging me. And I like to show them that the only thing that is a challenge is my willingness to try hard to figure it out. You ask, give me a problem and I'll solve it. Ask me for a specific balloon, I'll figure out how to make it.
Well, that definitely fits with everything I know about you. And part of why we get along so well, it's kind of a spite thing. Don't tell me I can't do it.
Well, I think, people look at life and they get very upset by things that are problems. And I started defining things as, three things. Not a problem with a solution, and a problem without a solution. And a problem without a solution, you basically just put on a shelf. There's nothing you can do with it. You put it on a shelf. There's nothing you can do with it. You make your piece and you move forward. I don't think there's a lot of those. I think we act like there's more of those than there really are. anything with a problem that has a solution is really not a problem. It's just something that has to be fixed or done. It's not something that really should be detrimental in life because it can be resolved. And then everything else is just good life.
So it's really just making a choice that it's time to resolve this issue one way or another.
Yeah. I mean, there's every single thing eventually has a solution. And that's what inventors are about. That's what pharmaceutical companies do. They say, here's an illness. How do we solve it? Or the other way around. Here's a medicine we don't have an illness for. How do we create an illness for it? It goes both ways.
That's a little cynical. True, but cynical. That's funny. The reason I wanted to have you on the show was because you told me something. We had a conversation a while back about perception. And the way that I put it is, I talk about this a lot. I write about it a lot. That there's a perception gap between how you perceive yourself, how you want to be perceived, and how people are actually perceiving you. And my impression is that most of us, not all, I mean, there are some that are very comfortable in their skin and are always the same person no matter what. But I think most of us have a very broad gap in that perception between how we see ourselves and how others see us, particularly in our youth. And then as we age, we get to a point where we can start to shrink that gap by being more intentional about what we do and how we do it. So you told me that you have a story about that kind of relates to that theme.
I do. It's a story about me that was told to me. So I spent a lot of time growing up feeling on an island, sort of in this abandonment mindset. And as you get older, that just, we carry things forward. We shouldn't. At some point, the past is the past and you live life moving forward. And because of this, I was an angry, not nice person. And I tried to bring everybody down to that level. And people who were around me would feel negative towards me because I treated people negatively, because I felt negatively about myself. As I got a little bit older, you get better at sort of wearing a mask, being what the world needs you to see, but still behind the mask being that person. As we mature, we sort of find that balance between what we are and what we want people to see. I think I once sent you the John Wooden quote, which was, be more concerned with your character than your reputation. Your reputation is what you want people to see your character as who you really are. Most people find a balance between showing a reputation and character. So when I was waiting tables and making balloon animals, the girl who bartended there was somebody I had known when I was younger. She grew up on a street with my best friend. And she told me a story when we worked together that when I was younger, 16, 17, she went up to him and she said, "How are you friends with him? He is the absolute meanest, worst person I have ever met." And he said to her, a 16-year-old child who certainly didn't come from perfection either, he said, "I've known Derek most of his life. And I know when he finds his true self, that's a person I will always want to have in my life and be friends with." And when she told me the story, I'm not sure if what he had said to her years earlier was true, and this set me on that path, or I appreciated that the one person in my life I've always counted on, always trusted, has always been there for me. If I just wanted him to be right, like if I felt like the only thing I could do for him is validate that belief by becoming the person he believed I could be. And it changed my world around. It made me start wanting to be this guy that the one person who's always supported me believed I could be. I wanted to be that. I wanted that person to be rewarded for their faith and their belief. And it pushed me in this positive direction in life. And I started working on self and building myself from there.
Wow. That's really interesting, because the story you had been telling yourself up to that point was that you truly were a horrible person and that you didn't deserve anything, any kind of kindness or friendship. And you clearly brought out the worst in most people that you were around but for some reason, there was one person that saw you for who you were. So
Maybe.
have you talked to him about it? Well, that's the question. Did you ever talk to him about it?
He's still my best friend. We talk every day. I mean,
But did you ask him?
I relayed that story to him years later, and
Mm-hmm.
we certainly had a deep conversation about it.
Did he say, I don't remember that at all?
No, he just downplays it because he's very humble. He's somebody that doesn't think in terms of course I did that or this, you know, he just does. He is as solid a human being as there is. You know, I mean, not even as a friend to me, right? So sometimes you have friends that are great people in the context of your relationship with them. And sometimes people are just great people. He's an unbelievable friend to me, but in general, he's a great person. You know, I feel very fortunate that he's my best friend.
So I wonder if he's had that impact on a lot of other people, do you think?
I don't know. I don't know how many other people need it as much as I did, but I mean, I can tell you in a starting from the beginning sort of way, he has 2 children, and him and his wife have certainly raised 2 great people. So he might not have had to turn lives around, but has his just optimism and positive vibe combined with being married to somebody who is his equal in a lot of ways as a person. Mm-hmm. They've created a generation of their family that represents the best of them, and that's really an amazing accomplishment.
I agree with that. I mean, partly because what they're doing is they're modeling that love, that positive attitude, that can do, get through obstacles kind of mentality, not just to their kids, but to everyone around them. And, you know, there's something magical about a person that brings out the best in other people. And I keep coming back to your friend, and for some reason it relates directly to what I see in our younger son, Max. And what I noticed about him is that...
Wait, our younger son, Max?
My younger son.
You scared me. I was going we're platonic friends.
Oh, do you have a son? No. Anyway, but what I noticed about him is when he's around his friends want to be better people when they're around him. And I don't know a lot of people that have that magical quality unintentionally. What about you? Do you see his magic in that sense as being unintentional? He's just who he is.
I think it's one of those balances. At 16, he is who he is. At 42, I think he takes that balance of responsibility. And I won't get cliche and quote Spider-Man's uncle, but you know, there's a point where first you have power, and then you just sort of, it just exists. And then you learn how to hone it and be better with it. And it goes from just being what you are to who you are to how you are.
Right. You choose it. Eventually you make it an intentional thing. That makes a lot of sense. And it fits right back into that idea of the perception gap, that when I look at Max, that's who I see. When you looked at your friend back then, that's who you see. But well, I don't think he sees himself that way.
I don't think he's the type of guy who would admit to seeing himself that way, even if he did, because that would be arrogant, and that's not something he ever would be. He's humble and thoughtful and selfless, you know, as a human being, not just as a friend or a father.
But he's probably more intentional with it now than he was before, because he looks at his children and he knows what he needed to hear and what you needed to hear.
I don't think he ever thought I'd hear it, though. So that's the real gift of it.
Right, but he was 16. But now at 42, my guess, and I'm just saying this from kind of a personal experience with my own relationships, that people come up to me years later and say, remember when you said this to me? And I have no recollection of it. But now at nearly 50, I look at people in a different way, and I kind of know what they need to hear. I don't know. It's just different. Again, the perception gap has been shrinking for me because I know what I want more. And
well, you have more repetition, right?
Mm-hmm. Like, experience.
Malcolm Gladwell has that whole book, and it focuses on thin slicing. And if you've done something enough times, it's second nature to be able to come up with the right way to handle it without thinking about it. But with that many repetition and that, ease of doing it, we see it more too. So we understand it more, and it becomes this like self-fulfilling machine where one side works the other side and the other side, and they just rotate around each other. So as you become, your intuitiveness hasn't grown, your awareness of your intuitiveness has. So you see your intuitiveness before you act on it and understand what somebody needs even more, because you've done it so many times.
That makes sense. Now I'm coming back to this idea that of intentional behavior. So you said at that moment, here you are, 22, and this woman has given you this incredible gift, and it takes you a little bit, but what was the first thing, tell me something really specific that happened shortly after that you made that choice? Can you think of a specific time?
So unfortunately, when I got this story, it's a seed. It's right, not, of course. The branches to that seed probably don't really sprout in a way that I can define in a real sense for years. The first thing I did to be a better person was out of pure vanity, but it was a start. I was in horrible shape and took very poor care of myself, and I dedicated myself to losing weight and getting in shape, and that helped me sort of grow the tree. That gave me something positive about me to sort of take forward, even if it was shallow.
No, and not shallow. Not shallow, because you can't take care of other people if you're not taking care of yourself. Oh. You have to choose you first.
It's the airline oxygen and oxygen mask analogy.
Absolutely. I hate that thing, but it's true. Okay, so look back from this point, and I've said this in previous podcast episodes. You didn't know back at some specific time that this was a pivot point in your life. And this experience at the restaurant with this bartender, you couldn't at that moment say, this is the moment that's changing my life. And I think most of the time when we think that, we're wrong. It's like we think, okay, this is it. This is going to be the big change in my life, and it's not. So if you can look back and you think about a decision you made, a specific moment in time that you did something different than you would have. You handled something differently, whether it was with a friend or a girlfriend or work situation, that you can look back now and you can say, oh my gosh, yeah, that was a decision I made.
It's hard. I really find it to be a gradual evolution.
Of course.
You don't wake up one morning and have lost 50 pounds. So you don't notice.
You don't notice at that moment.
Right, but you don't notice day to day the weight loss in that way. But you look back after a year and you go, wow. I can look back and see where I started and where I am, but it's hard for me to give you one seminal moment on that path that I can really point to.
I'll give you an example. When I decided to start caring better for my body, I used to go to McDonald's maybe once a month, which was a lot for me. In my family, we had McDonald's maybe twice a year. So, but when I was in college, I would eat stuff that really wasn't good for me, and I did it more regularly than I should have. But I can look back at this one point. I was living in a studio apartment. I was kind of in a depression, and there was an Arby's right behind my house, or where I was staying. And I went into my car because I was broke, and I was looking for coins. I mean, literally, I was so hungry. I was looking for coins. And I found about $2, and I knew that was enough for one roast beef sandwich at Arby's. And I looked at that money in my hand, and I consciously said to myself, if you eat that, it's not going to make you feel any better. And I remember this vivid moment when I decided not to spend my money on that roast beef sandwich, and instead to walk over to the grocery store a few blocks away and buy myself some noodles and fruit. I remember making that decision and not knowing at that time that was going to be a pivot point, because from that point forward, I knew I had that self-control. And before that, I didn't really demonstrate a whole lot of self-control.
There's a lot of see, for me, it's less about specific things. I started creating sort of rules, only drink socially. Drinking should be fun. I don't drink if I'm even now, if I had a really bad day, if I'm out with friends, I won't drink because I want to be able to deal with my feelings. But I can't point to something that specific as it pertains to me mentally. Physically, I can. I was at a wedding and I saw a picture of myself and I didn't recognize who it was. I had to ask. It was one of those things where you see a picture 3 days later because pre-digital phones. And I was like, who is that? And he was like, that. My friend was like, that's you. And at that point, I quit drinking, doing anything else I shouldn't be doing, and watching what I eat. But that's not a mental
dig into
thing.
that. It is. It's a story. It's part of your story. So tell me about the wedding.
It was a friend's wedding. It was really it was the first wedding of somebody we were friends with. It was in that same time range as the other story with the bartender.
Okay.
And the person in the picture with me is the same person that story is about.
So you're at this wedding and you're hanging out with your buddies and everybody's having a good time, right?
Yeah.
And then 3 days later, where are you when you're seeing this picture?
I think he had them developed and we were at his apartment maybe.
Okay.
Or where he was living.
And you're laughing at the pictures.
No, it's the first one. It's the first one we saw. And I was like, whoa, who's that? And he goes, that's you. And I go, I mean, I didn't recognize myself.
What did he say?
What was
his reaction?
So his reaction is always positive. He is always positive and supportive. So his reaction is, he's like, you don't look that bad. And I go, and then it starts to make, it makes me think backwards to buying the shirt. I'm not a tall guy, and men's shirts, unless they're tailored or based on 2 sizes, your neck size and your sleeve size. My neck at the time was 22 inches. My sleeve length is 32 inches. There's not a lot of shirts you can buy with those measurements.
Right.
So, then you look at the picture of you in that shirt and you think, I'm wearing a shirt that they don't even make, because there's nobody with this neck and this arm that would buy a shirt. They just throw a potato sack on you and call it a day. Maybe a barrel with suspenders. And then I see this picture of myself, and not only is the shirt big, because in your mind you can say, well, I'm just really stocky, but the pictures don't lie. They're worth at least 1,000 words they've been promised.
Mm-hmm.
And I committed at that point in seeing the picture, and I quit drinking for a year and cleaned up my lifestyle, my diet, and went from, I'd weighed myself, I was 262 and then 177 at the end of about a year, but still felt emotionally dark. Mm-hmm. I mean, I guess from that point, I was the same person physically, just a smaller version of that person. So I got into fitness, and getting in the fitness and feeling better about my body brought me back around to this story with the bartender. And I wanted to feel as good about myself as I started to feel like I was looking, but looking in a weird way, because it's not like I'd look in the mirror and be like, you're so handsome. I just know I'm just comparing myself to when I was at my worst. I look way better than I did. When somebody weighs 400 pounds and they lose 50, everybody tells them how great they look. But, in the grand scheme, if somebody weighed 300 pounds and went to 350, we'd be talking, it's perspective, right? The perspective of, expectation based on where the starting point was. So I knew I was looking better for me. I'm not going to say I look good in general. And it made me want to feel better, which took me on the next path, which would be, starting to work on myself. And that year was hard because when you are used to self-medicating, it quiets a lot of emotions that you don't deal with. And if you've always self-medicated, the volume of those emotions could be overwhelming. I always compare it to when Superman first figures out he has super hearing and he hears everything going on in the world. It's just overwhelming. So I started to work on myself, but I didn't go to therapy. I thought if I went to therapy right away and let it all out that quickly, it would break me. So it took me about 1.5 years to get to the point where I felt I was strong enough to take that next step. And then I got into therapy and really started to move down the path. And at then some point in that range, I was able to tell my friend about the story that I was able to reflect back onto when I started to get further down the path, and really made me focus on this journey.
So you said that it was this physical motivation or a physical change. I think it's so much more than that, though. And part of it is that story. You're sitting in your friend's apartment and you don't even recognize yourself, and he says, "You don't look that bad." I mean, and at that moment you decided you didn't want to look like that anymore. But the reality is, just like my story of being able to suddenly realize your self-control, to suddenly realize that you have that power for yourself, maybe not for others, but for yourself. And you hadn't recognized your own power in you yet. And that year of transition and transformation, it wasn't just a physical transformation. You suddenly had this confidence that if I can make my body change like this, I bet I can make myself the person that my friend thinks I am.
So it wasn't confidence. So now it would be. So we get back to, when you were younger and you intuitively knew what somebody needed, and now you logically know what somebody needs. I didn't have the confidence then. It was either change or die. I mean, not to be dramatic, but I couldn't see living the rest of my life that way. People, there are people that know that I really believed I would die by the time I was 35, because I felt like somebody who wouldn't be able to want to live that long. You can only be so dark and angry and eat yourself up from the inside and expand yourself from the outside for so long before it can break you. So it was, on some level you feel like there's no option, and on some level you don't want to, I start to get my hands around the story, right? To your point, it's not something you immediately realize is something that is going to change your life, but it becomes the thing you keep going back to. When I needed to be motivated or to stay on path, it was a great tool to go back to and say, remember who believed in you. The one person you think is the world's best person believed in you. He's always believed in you, and he deserves to be right. And it would always bring me back to center and drive me to that next step.
So do you try to do anything like that for other people? I mean, not in exactly the same way, but
constantly. I will extend myself in different ways all the time, beyond the scope of normal friendship or just humanity. I'm a believer, people, it's very easy to be compassionate towards a loved one or a friend, but can you be compassionate to somebody you've never met before? Can you be compassionate to somebody who's homeless and not just look at him, somebody who's, mentally ill or a failure or anything like that, and just look at him and say, is there something small I can do here? Not give them money. I generally will buy homeless people food. Actually, I think that happened when we were in Philadelphia, right? I think I went to Walgreens, and now that I say it. Yeah. And, or take the time, or figure out a weird outside of the normal way to interact with somebody when I see that. I also get to tell the story about Ryan to people and use it as a leaping off point to extend that perception of them from me to them. It gives me this bridge.
I love that. Yeah, it's part of why we're friends, I think, is that. So we'll go back a little so that our listeners will better understand when we were in Philadelphia. It was was it 4 years ago or 5 years ago? I had flown into the Philadelphia airport to bury my father, and had spent from Wednesday to Sunday with my family dealing with that. And then Sunday night was stranded at the Philadelphia airport because all the flights were canceled. It was February. And my family had all gotten on planes and had left, and I was stuck there by myself. And Derek had come to the airport to pick me up, took me into town, took me out to dinner, and dropped me off at a beautiful hotel while making sure that I had a ride to the airport the next day. And so to this day, I always talk about Derek being my knight in shining armor, particularly because it was such a hard time having just buried my dad. So, and when we were walking around in Philadelphia, we were exploring downtown a little bit, and Derek saw a homeless guy that was clearly pretty hungry sitting outside. And we walked into Walgreens, picked up a few snacks, and then delivered it to the homeless guy. So that was that story. Pretty cool.
Yeah, I wonder if I should start keeping the receipts of that food I buy the homeless guys. I could take it as a tax. I think that's a tax break.
Not anymore. Not anymore.
I'll expense it as a marketing expense for business. I'm kidding.
I know. Yeah.
So,
well, I think that's a good note to finish on. Is that reminder that those little things can make a lifetime of difference for people. And it doesn't matter if they're 16 or they're 60. When you can say something or do something, even the smallest thing, it can make a huge difference. Is that where you were going with that, Derek?
Well, I was going to close on my end telling a story about the bridge that connects us, the person who connects you and I. Mm-hmm. And, I had known Karen when I was 17 and 18. Okay. And she's somebody that could tell you the difference between me then and now. And she has a big gap in between 17 and 18. And when I saw her again for the first time in a long time, over a decade later. And I came out to visit her, and it was amazing. And it was amazing to reconnect with somebody who was very positive and very warm, and to show them who I am now. It was like an interesting test for me, because it's somebody that didn't see the gradual growth and just got to see me at one end and then closer to the other end. Mm-hmm. So 6 months, a year later, she tells me a story that a friend from high school that was never nice to her wanted to come out and visit. So she said, great. And in her mind, she thought, well, look how much Derek changed from being this angry, mean, miserable guy to being this warm, decent, thoughtful person. Her words, not mine. And then she was mad at me because this person was the same person in high school. And she felt like my ability to grow as a person and really redefine who I am misled her to think other people could do that too. So
that's a funny story.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. I was in trouble for being nicer.
Yeah, but I think everybody has the capacity for it. They have to know they want it. And one of the things I find a lot is people who don't know that they're part of the problem. They don't take that responsibility to say, how am I contributing to these negative patterns in my life? And it's not that they can't. I think it just is a matter of choice. And some people don't know that they can choose.
Well, from that standpoint, I'm lucky. I would say, and it's probably what makes me good at problem solving with the existence of no box, because I can step outside myself. Like I learned to look at myself as if I was a different person, and it makes it a lot easier. We always give great advice when we're being logical about somebody else's life. But when we have to look at our own lives, it becomes emotional and egotistical, and we can be stubborn and not be able to logically see the things we see in others. And I feel like I've gotten much better at being able to take a step back and logically see those things in myself.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Introspection, self-reflection. It's kind of the point of this podcast. So it's a perfect ending point. Derek, thank you so much for spending the time talking to me about this. There are some great stories in here, lots of things to think about later on. Oftentimes when I talk to you, I walk away and it takes me a couple days to actually process some of what we talk about. So
I get that a lot.
Be no different.
I get that a lot, but I think you meant that in a nice way this time.
Yeah, definitely. Well, thank you. And I will probably have you back in a year or so. We can talk a little bit more about the transformation, because I'd be really curious to hear some more of that story. So thank you.
It would be my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for listening to Your Stories Don't Define You. How you share them will. Please visit my website for more podcast episodes, blog posts, and information about how I can help you develop and share your stories. at elkinsconsulting.com.
Now listen to me, honey, while I say, how could you tell me that